This is my land now. You better run.
Come on, let's go. Let's go. If there was one thing I could change about The Walking Dead, it would be Rick Grimes leaving. When Rick left, it set so many things out of sync. His absence shaped what the rest of this now franchise would be. And by the time the main show ended, we had massive spaces where we didn't see Rick Grimes take on the Whisperers. We didn't see him do all the stuff from the comics that I think at the start of the story, he was always lined up to do. I think Rick leaving The Walking Dead had one of the biggest negative domino effects in any show I've seen. So I think it's finally time to answer that question of what if Rick Grimes didn't leave? Now, something equally as important, well, perhaps a bit more important, is our mental health. This episode is in paid partnership with BetterHelp. Just like we ponder what ifs in our favourite shows, we tend to end up doing the same thing in real life. Sometimes it's tough to talk about what's going on in our lives. BetterHelp is amazing because you can do it from home. There's days where we don't want to leave the house, especially to leave the house to go and talk to someone about our personal problems. Sometimes that can feel a bit overwhelming for many people, or sometimes we're just too busy to fit in appointments when your life is already hectic, you've already got stuff to do. BetterHelp offers a comforting solution. With them, you can receive therapy right from home through just texting or other means like video chat and phone calls without the stress of travel or fitting appointments into a busy life. Signing up with BetterHelp is straightforward. You take a simple quiz, share your struggles and goals, and they match you with a suitable therapist. In most cases, 48 hours or less, from their network of credentialed professionals. And if you ever feel the need to switch therapists, it's as easy as tapping a button in your settings, and it makes finding a trustworthy therapist less daunting. And it's incredible how speaking with someone can lift so much weight off your shoulders. And remember, there's no shame in seeking help. Speaking to a therapist can help you process your emotions in a safe space. It's a good way to ease into getting therapy. It could be really beneficial for you. There's a link in my description. Clicking this link not only supports the channel, but also gets you a 10% discount on your first month with BetterHelp. So it's a win-win. You support my content while exploring the transformative journey of therapy. Thank you to BetterHelp for being a paid partner in today's video. Now, let's get into it. So, we need to save Rick from this moment. Now, the whole reason Rick was even out there is he was on his way to Alexandria to stop Maggie from killing Negan. As soon as he was told about it by Jerry, he tried relaying a message to Alexandria through his walkie-talkie, but they didn't do it. Before going himself on his horse, Daryl offers to take him on his motorbike. It will be faster, he says. But this was Daryl and Maggie's plan. Maggie would go and kill Negan, while Daryl would steer Rick away, so this is what he does. Rick and Daryl pushed each other into a hole, and by the time they were out, a big herd was heading towards the communities. Rick gets on a horse to try and steer them away, but falls on debris, is injured, and then when cornered, blows up dynamite on the bridge, sacrificing himself and to all the other characters dead, until about 8 years later in the story, where he will now have his own Universal movie trilogy, which is now just a 6-episode spin-off with Michonne. This time, man, it's gonna go the way it was supposed to.
So, to save Rick, while Daryl is tempted to pull over and ruin the show, he doesn't succumb to the urge. He respects Rick. Daryl doesn't have this little scheme with Maggie to stop him from getting to her. He takes him to Alexandria, and they both arrive just after Maggie comes to the realization that she'd rather Negan live in pain, which even though it isn't Rick talking her down, I think it still means a lot to him, the fact that she would rather let him live too. She understands. For Rick and for Carl, for herself, if we're being honest, Maggie rushes past them all as Rick sees she's spared Negan. Now, Maggie does leave to get completely away from Negan. She still doesn't like the fact that he's kept around, but she knows that's what's got to happen, so she just has to get away from it, so she still leaves, but there is no 6-year time jump. Now, meanwhile, if Rick doesn't leave, where does Jadis go if she has nothing to trade? Well, she would still go. She had nothing to trade to begin with. Her actual plan at the start was to hijack the helicopter, but she saw Rick last minute, so this would definitely cause Jadis to have different treatment from the CRM down the line.
I warned you there'd be consequences if you tried something.
perhaps not being some colonel or trainer. We know she would go on to World Beyond and be the trainee of Huck. Now, you would still have Magna's group arrive. It would just be only shortly after Maggie's left. So Judith wouldn't be some grown talking kid now. She would still be the same that she was before Rick left, because there's not been that 6-year time jump. So instead of Judith saving them, it's Aaron, Eugene, Rosita, and Laura. Now, in the show, what actually happened is they were quite on edge and almost a bit hostile towards Magna's group. But with Rick there, I think he would have them be more open and just do the 3 questions that he would ask people. He was all about growing the communities, so the 3 would invite them back. That interview process would still happen, but they would be welcomed in. They wouldn't be so on edge. And it's stuff like this that would lead to the cracks in the armour. Later that day, when trying to install an antenna, Eugene and Rosita get outswarmed by a herd. The walkers start whispering. So Rosita hides Eugene in a barn and runs back to Alexandria for help. Then on that night, a search party goes out that consists of Aaron, Daryl, Jesus, and Rick. Now, to see this Rick that has got to this almost prime happy place, where even though there's been trouble with the Saviours, he's done a good job of uniting everything. So Rick's reaction, when he thought he had seen everything, he had conquered everything, the zombies start talking. He would be in disbelief, and he wouldn't shut it down like Daryl did. I think we'd see a very worried, nervous Rick.
We have to get away before it comes back. This wasn't a normal herd.
What do you mean?
When they passed us by, we could hear them. They were whispering to each other.
You mean they were talking?
I know how it sounds. But Rosita heard it too. She'll corroborate.
Yeah, you should get him back. Yeah.
They get outnumbered in a graveyard. They all try opening this gate, but it doesn't budge. But Michonne, Magna, and Yumiko appear on the scene, and we see Rick actually happy and impressed by Magna, who, although he was positive about, had doubts that she would ever want to fit in Alexandria. So when they finally budge the gate, they all stand there waiting for Jesus to take out some remaining stragglers, only for him to get caught off guard.
You are where you do not belong.
Now, this is the man that represented that next step into, as he said, the next world, the new world. Again, this is something we really should have gotten with Rick. He should have been there. Daryl kneels down and finds stitches and a mask. The reveal, the introduction of the Whisperers. Rick is shocked and concerned. When he thought he knew every angle of people and human nature, he sees the Whisperers. There are now people within the zombies. On the way back, they encounter a small group of Whisperers. This is where they find Lydia. They take her back to Hilltop and put her in a cell.
Why do you wear their skins?
Answer! Do they know about this place? Huh?
I don't know. I don't know anything. They didn't tell me anything. Please stop asking me.
And after her not saying anything, they talk outside of the basement, where Michonne mentions to Rick that after what Maggie had to do to Gregory,
You know what you have to do.
Rick doesn't like the idea of killing. He knows they have to be better than that. If they didn't kill Negan, why would they kill this girl when she's clearly just misled? Meanwhile, we have Henry talking to her in the cell next to her and still taking Carl's comic storyline. Again, this isn't something we can change when Carl still died before Rick left. This is a what if Rick stayed video, not a what I want video. During the Whisperers arc, it was revealed that not long after Rick left, Michonne and Daryl encountered one of Michonne's old friends and a bunch of kids. They both had previously revealed having X scars on them, and it was teasing that this extra layer had happened. Michonne's friend turned out to be some psychotic manipulating leader of all of these kids, like Lord of the Flies. And if Rick hadn't left, to put it simply, it wouldn't happen. Do these kids and Michonne's friends still exist? Yeah, sure, but Michonne wouldn't be so vulnerable when this woman walked into Alexandria and deceived everyone. You'd have Rick there, so these little demon kids wouldn't have a chance. But obviously, putting that all aside anyway, the whole point of that episode was basically for Michonne to reveal to Judith that Rick had died, so none of that would need to happen, nor work if he was still there. With Lydia still at Hilltop, Alpha makes her first appearance and confronts them.
I'm Alpha. I just want my daughter. I know you have her.
You should turn around. Leave now, no one gets hurt.
Wrong answer.
With Daryl actually not wanting to hand her over, Rick is 100% going for the most peaceful option. He doesn't want to cause friction and he doesn't want to kill anyone, including Lydia, so he gives the go-ahead to Daryl to bring her down there. Rick watches from the gates. While they all thought it was dealt with, Henry is missing, and he's actually followed the Whisperers back to their camp for Lydia. When Daryl finds out, he leaves quietly at night with Connie, as he knows Rick won't want conflict and might not do what needs to be done. This push and pull from Rick and Daryl is something that we didn't even see go on for that long before he left. It was 5 episodes of Rick protecting Negan and Daryl saying that they should kill him. But in this timeline, they would still have these disagreements about stuff like Lydia and the Whisperers, which is perhaps more intact with Daryl's character. If you look at how he was in the earlier seasons, you know, he just would be that more wild one. And he actually said to Rick, he thinks he should just let Carl go. This vision he's got sometimes just doesn't apply to people like Negan, to people like Alpha. Before Rick turns in for the night, he sees Daryl leave. Now, as you might remember in the show, Beta finds Henry. They keep him with them for a bit before Alpha eventually tells Lydia to kill Henry. So before Daryl goes into the camp and causes something they won't be able to come back from, Rick arrives.
What? Don't be weak. Kill him, or he'll kill you both. You decide.
Drop it. Don't.
Who are you?
You killed the others? It doesn't have to be this way. You do this, everything we're doing, it ends.
Daryl kills a Whisperer and uses the mask to grab Henry. Although Rick intervened, he got to go into the camp, Daryl still did what he did, so I think that fight with Beta would still happen. I want to be really strict with the story, and I don't want to just replace the good that Daryl did with Rick. Daryl definitely took some comic Rick storylines, but we can't just replace him. Now, they're all pretty shaken by what's happened, but the community start talking about a trade fair at the Kingdom. Now, Michonne, being the one that has been more closed off in the past, isn't too sure about it, but Rick actually wants to do the fair. He sees it as a monument to all that they've done in the past year, and he doesn't want to see the Kingdom fall.
No, it hasn't been easy, I know. It won't be, not for a while, but it's not about forgetting. It's about moving ahead, all of us, together. We keep doing that, they'll see we're all on the same side.
To what end? She'd just veto it.
I would.
It's complicated.
But this is where Rick was about to get a rude awakening. He can honour Carl, but being unsafe like this is where there's more cracks in the armour. They all lost something from the Pikes, but this was about to be the start of Rick losing something more. Sadiq. They have this fair, and it starts off as the best day in Rick's life since before the apocalypse.
Took us far too long to fulfill the promise of what Carl envisioned.
And it is one big celebration of how far they've come until Daryl, Carol, Michonne and Rick are out on yet another search party.
Come on, head back. Let's go.
Watch their hands. They could be skins.
Back to the road, come on.
I won't ask twice. You just had to give me the girl. No one else had to die. Now that deal is done.
Come with me. Just you.
Alpha takes Rick up on that cliff, and his worst nightmare has just come true. this villain has control over a herd of thousands. This is worse than anything Rick's ever dealt with.
My people are among them, steering them. The only reason you and your friends are alive is because I let you live.
He can't even speak. Shocked, all Rick can utter is, "What do you want?"
Nothing. I've got a single thing to offer me. Seeing how you live. I've walked your streets. It's a joke. Your communities are a shrine to a long-dead world. My people, the Whisperers, we live as nature intended. They follow me because I am the Alpha. And if the Alpha doesn't assert herself, then there's chaos. That is what I've done.
After hearing Alpha's speech, he smiles at her. There's a small moment where he's not intimidated. Even after catching her out and telling her how stupid all of it is, she still believes it. She acknowledges that they're like animals, and that she thinks she needs to be this. And that's where we see Rick stressed and agitated. You know, there's almost no convincing that level of delusion.
Your friends back at the camp are fine. Tell them the next time they cross into my land, my horde will cross into theirs. The land between the broken-in estates and the river to the south is mine. I've marked the border to the north. You'll see it as you leave. Go. Your friends will be waiting for you in the field due north.
When they come back, an angry Rick says, "We're leaving," and Daryl gives that look as if to say, "Aren't we just going to kill them or we've fought better?" But of course Daryl hasn't seen the herd.
I've marked the border to the north. You'll see it as you leave.
They don't think much of it. At this point, Rick thinks about just going back to the fair, finishing the rest of the day off, and dealing with this later. They don't need to go into new land just yet, until they see what the border's made out of. Relieved to see that right now Sadiq is okay, Rick cared about everyone on those pikes. Tara, Enid. But the worst of it is a young Henry. An episode you might not remember as important, but was actually really important, is the episode after the Pikes, the finale of season 9 called The Storm, where we essentially saw the kingdom shut down, and the whole main group at the time having to not only tough the snowstorm, but cross Alpha's border. Alpha later found this out with their whisperer plant, Dante, and a second time when Carol and Daryl crossed it, and another when that space satellite crashes just next to Alpha's border. When Daryl and Carol return to Alexandria, Daryl reveals to Rick and Michonne that they crossed the border just for a deer, and Alpha saw it. They scold them for it. Rick stresses out and worries that this could lead to more people dying. So he raises the idea that he goes out by himself to show that he means no harm, to try and find their new Whisperer camp, where he will apologise and try to talk about peace. At first, Rick enters with his gun holstered and explains the reasons why they had to cross the border just for a moment, but Alpha reveals she knows how many times they've really crossed the border and says they need punishment.
3 times. We are always watching. What did I tell you about crossing my border? You have to be punished. But I consider context. There will be no bloodshed this time. Creek that winds into the valley, that is your new southern border. We will mark the new border to the north. This is my land now. You better run.
And after this confrontation, Rick just leaves more worried. He returns to Alexandria, and all of the main characters in the show have a meeting. He briefs them on all the times Alpha was aware they crossed the borders, and that they have broken that rule now multiple times. Daryl suggests they send Negan into their camp, but just get him to deal with it. They've got nothing to lose from it. If he dies, he dies. Rick turns his head to the idea. Deep down he knows it's a good, convenient idea, but he just doesn't want him leaving that cell. He doesn't trust Negan. Plus, he still thinks it's important that Negan lives, and doesn't get to be free like that. It seems like a joke at first, but Carol, Michonne, and even Gabriel, who does trust Negan and frankly wants him to survive it, agree with the idea.
We have to let him out.
But after some convincing, at the end of this big meeting, Rick comes around. At first, Carol says that Rick should be the one to go down and ask him.
You should talk to him.
You'd say what?
But they all agree that with Daryl coming up with it, with him being the one in the cage previously, he should go and do it. So Daryl agrees. He goes down to Negan's cell and asks Negan to go into the Whisperers camp and kill Alpha. This isn't Daryl asking for help from Negan. This is him having the power over him. Him now in the cell with no choice. They bring Negan up to the council hall and they all reveal to him that they agree with the plan, and Negan loves it.
All you had to do was ask. Cut through their territory.
Michonne says to Negan, you can't just take her out, we have to see that you've done it. Negan looks at Carol and jokes that he's going to take Alpha's head for her boy. They all look away in disapproval while Carol hides a smile. But at the end of the council table, Sadiq is actually a bit triggered by what he said. This sets off Sadiq hearing this. He's clearly reminded of what happened at that barn. Michonne and Rick notice it, so does Dante. But they send Negan off.
If he's lying, this is already over.
And of course, to state the obvious, in season 10, Michonne left to go and find Rick. That stuff with Virgil wouldn't exist, and of course, more importantly, Michonne would not have left. Shortly after sending Negan, Rick goes to visit Sadiq, as he saw that he was off at the meeting and was definitely affected by even Negan making a joke. He comforts him and thanks him for everything that he's done for the last year and a half, being a doctor and helping. He says Carl would be proud, and he knows that he didn't die in vain. He jokes that if Carl was still here, he could have taken them all out by himself. This would be the last time Rick would speak to Sadiq. Later that night, after noticing he was off at the meeting with Negan, Dante pays Sadiq a visit, where Sadiq has one final flashback to the barn after hearing Dante's distinct clicking noise. They have Dante tied up, and Rick can barely hold it together. He's just deceived and killed the very man that Carl died for, everything he represented, mocking the idea of saving people.
No one is actually kind. We are selfish. We are brutal. Come on. Even seeing all those heads on spikes didn't teach you what people are?
He's knocked out and put in Negan's cell. Here we see Rick's philosophy challenged. Do we give everyone a second chance? Would Carl still want to save Dante even after what he did to Sadiq? Rick now pays Dante a visit in the very cell that Negan was just in. Rick tells Dante who Sadiq was and that his son died saving him.
Why? Why does that matter? It's a meaningless idea. Keep talking. Look at me. Look what people did to the world. And you think we can be good? You think we deserve a second chance?
In the main show's timeline, Gabriel actually killed Dante. So Dante kind of won in the way that Gabriel lost himself in the moment he became this unhinged killer. Really good to watch. But when it came to writing all of this, I was thinking, do I have Rick kill Dante just as Gabriel did? Because actually, I think of all people other than Negan, Dante is the most important for Rick to spare. Sure, we could have Rick kill Dante because it's cool. Maybe this is what teaches him going forward when to kill, when to not kill. But what you might not realize is Rick already knows that.
Killing each other when the world already belongs to the dead? It's not the way. Not anymore.
You know, he's not having a moment where he's just not wanting to kill, like what Morgan and Carol went through 5 times. It's about deciding which people to apply Carl's wish to, and Dante, at the end of the day, is misled. Alpha clearly preyed upon him when he was in a time of vulnerability after he lost his son, if that wasn't just a lie. Alpha taught him that everything is pointless, that it can't go back to civilization and the way things used to be, that there are no second chances. It's about proving Dante and Alpha wrong. So Rick definitely spares Dante, and he goes on to become Dante from the comics. I think Gabriel initially saw goodness in him for a reason. I've always disagreed with the idea that Sadiq dying meant that Carl died for nothing. He was a doctor for the communities for years. But one thing I do think was wrong about it is that Rick wasn't there for it. He was so protective of Sadiq.
So I'd like you to head back home. There's a bug going around.
Okay.
I'll head out with the next escort.
So hopefully in the Rick show, there's a scene where Michonne actually stops to tell him about it, and she rationalizes it. But in my timeline, Rick is here to at least enforce Carl's message. A couple of weeks pass after sending Negan, and they start talking about other options to act on, as they're not sure Negan's gonna end up coming back, or that he even made it there. They start thinking maybe he was killed, maybe he was found out, maybe he just ran off. But Negan arrives at the gates of Alexandria, whistling, happy, somewhat accomplished. He has a bag on him. Negan empties the bag in front of them and it's Alpha's head. He has killed Alpha. They are all surprised and massively relieved. Even Rick is looking at Negan like he's just made a cure. They all have another meeting. The characters all thank Negan. The people who didn't like him before are thankful now. While he's grateful, Rick doesn't say thank you. He sees this as what they're all owed from Negan. He's also traumatized from the last time he said it.
Thank you. I just slit my dick.
He says to him, you can have a walk around Alexandria, but after that, he's going back in his cell tonight. When Michonne takes him down to his cell, he's nearly crying in disbelief that he's really getting treated like this after what he did. While they're having this meeting, Scott keeps trying to radio in about something. They all ignore it as they get into this heated debate about Negan. Rick makes it clear that he doesn't want him walking around Alexandria, but Carol, with how much she hated Alpha and wanted her dead, says maybe we can just get him to work. Rick still doesn't trust him. Michonne knows that Rick will never have Negan just walking around again, and that he can't see the future they're building. So Michonne raises the idea of what if they just send him away? Let him still not be a part of their future, but free. He's earned his freedom, just as they did. Before Rick can reply, they're interrupted by a drastic shouting on his walkie-talkie. It's Scott again. He's been out on that water tower, checking for more waves of walkers. Rick finally asks him, what's going on? Scott screeches down the walkie-talkie, walkers, before they hear him scream, the sound of his walkie falling and a bone-breaking sound, before going silent. They keep trying to get back to him, but nothing. Until they hear... followed by what sounds like hundreds of thousands of walker groans. It's Beta. He's killed Scott, and they're next. That's it. After Negan killed Alpha, they've all followed him here and Beta has summoned the herd. Michonne rips Negan back out of his cell and Rick throws him a weapon. We're about to see Rick and Negan fight alongside each other. As Alexandria gets more and more crowded, they have to start their unfinished plan that they had for if Alpha ever used that herd. Their aim is to lead all the walkers to Oceanside and off a cliff into the ocean. Now while their plan is working, Negan sees Beta and can't resist taunting him. But now he can see Negan, he charges after him and a whole group of walkers with him. This nearly causes Rick, Aaron and Daryl to be outnumbered until Aaron pushes him to the ground and Daryl kills him. Rick looks up at Negan as if he could kill him. It's revealed that Negan's taunting led to Rosita getting bitten when she was cornered, getting Andrea's comic death. After it's all over, they finally have to decide what to do with Negan after all the help he's been, but with all the time he took and who they lost. Rick says they should exile Negan, and they all agree, but not before Rick gives him one final speech.
You know what I see? I see someone that's pretending.
Excuse me?
I had to.
Wrong. You're gonna stand there and listen to every word.
What the hell is wrong with you? I've been putting my neck on a block for you people all goddamn day.
I gave you the benefit of the doubt. That is done. Now, you pack your shit and get out of here first thing in the morning. If I see your face again, stitches won't fix what I do to you.
I did what I had to do back then.
Carol is still indirectly grateful for what Negan did, so while he's leaving, she offers to take him to a nearby cabin, says he can live out his days here.
I'm sorry. The council's voted to banish you.
But in this alternate universe, there's a Christmas special called The Walking Dead Negan Lives that shows Negan's backstory and what he's gonna do next. Maggie returns with Herschel and her wardens. Again, the wardens still exist, but we just don't need the Reapers. They're all happy to reunite, but Maggie feels uneasy walking through Alexandria. She wants to face Negan. She sneaks down to that cell ready to see him again, to test how much she's grown, but sees Dante. She asks what happened to the man that was in here before. Dante smiles and says they sent him away. She runs off to Rick and Michonne and cries about it. More of the usual. Even when I'm writing it, that would realistically still happen. But in place of that awful Maggie putting up with Negan storyline, we have Dante. He has Dante in the comic storyline and gets with Maggie. Then we have Eugene, Yumiko, Ezekiel and Princess going to meet Stephanie and the Commonwealth. This would all still happen. It was actually a really accurate adaptation of the comics. In the comics, Sadiq and Michonne were there. Sadiq is dead, and with Michonne being with Rick in the show, I think it's important that she's there with him at Alexandria to witness the Commonwealth with him. And after that, we go straight to the Commonwealth and we get a lovely, fulfilling story arc with them.
Hello. I'm Lance.
This connection, this upgrade is everything Rick's been looking for. He sees this as any other potential struggle of supplies that any of the communities could have had now dealt with. So they get there and Rick is all about making sure this Commonwealth connection is good for all of the other communities they already have. He's already got suspicions over Lance. Being a former cop, he already knows there's quite a seedy, sleazy side to him. After that first meeting with him, Rick talks to Connie and Kelly. As Daryl tells him, Connie already brought down Pamela's uncle. This makes Rick even more concerned. What I love about this is that it's almost a complete mirror of when they first arrived to Alexandria, but much better. They see how far they've come. They're not all dirty and desperate, or really even on edge. They know this is the real deal, but they've grown and been through so much. This really is the final boss of the show. In the comics, with Michonne being in that group with Eugene and Princess, she's the one to see a picture on the Wall of the Lost. She recognises her daughter Elodie. I don't like pointless kids in the show, or blatant inserts to give meaning to fates and story choices, so I'm not going to be a hypocrite and now give Michonne Elodie just because the comics did it. I don't think that would happen in the show with or without Rick. But we still need Michonne to get her foot in the door, so I think it would still be Michonne that becomes a lawyer and gets that nice place to live. Then you get the thing of Sebastian and Mercer. Now, Mercer would be the NPC that he was in the show still. We don't really need to mention him too much. I was actually surprised in the show how quickly he was nice and vulnerable. I don't think anything even had to be done in the show. You had these pointless, long, drawn-out conversations to get him to join their side, but there was no toughness to begin with. There was no ice to break. In the comics, he was still similar to that, but in the show, it felt like there was no budging that even needed to be done. Now, in this timeline, I did think maybe they wouldn't even have a fake Stephanie to cover for the real one to get information out of them, because if you've got the likes of Rick and Michonne still in the show, you wouldn't really need whole episodes dedicated to Eugene's girlfriend. But I think this was good at showing that dark, sleazy side to Lance, the very clear, yet very inconspicuous mentions of Lance's connection and knowledge of the CRM. The show played it really safe on directly mentioning the CRM, but with Rick still in the show, I think they would actually double down on the CRM stuff. So with Lance, stuff like this probably would still happen. Rick welcomes Lance and Pamela back with them to review the communities. In this scene with Aaron introducing them, it was actually a direct adaptation of the comics where this was Rick. So of course, this is what Rick would be doing. It's here we see Daryl get overprotective of Alexandria, just a bit more untrusting. Rick tells him to stand down. He walks along with Pamela and tells her that Daryl is only like this because of the people they've encountered. He mentions how they were even going to stay in a prison until a man who called himself the governor killed their people and destroyed it. Pamela apologises and says how awkward calling her the governor must have been, to just call her Pamela from now on. This wasn't just Rick telling her why Daryl was defensive, it's also so she knows what they've been through and what they're up against. Pamela asks where Rick's house is, and she seems surprised to find out that his house is the same as everyone else's, and it's with everyone else's. Pamela argues that people need to look up to Rick or it all comes crashing down. Rick replies by saying, people look up to me by what I do and continue to do, not by what I have. We're all equals here. Why build anything on the foundation at all? Why ruin it by burdening it with supporting others? This episode ends with Pamela saying, that's the world order. always has been, and Rick replying, then maybe we need a new world order. Now those lines I've just said there are directly from the comics when Pamela came to visit Alexandria. We didn't hear that in the show because Aaron hadn't actually been through all of that to say that. He wasn't really the leader. He's not been through what Rick had. Rick takes Pamela to the oceanside shore to see the beach, where they speak about how they defeated the Whisperers. On the way to Hilltop from Oceanside, they get cornered by a herd and there's direct conflict on how to deal with it. Rick tries to work with Mercer, but he's too busy making sure Pamela is escorted to safety, while Daryl and a group of Alexandrians deal with them all. Pamela in the distance, watching it, saying she's impressed. Now, much of what we actually saw of Daryl and Maggie just before Rick left, they were both equally against the Saviors and now equally as defensive against trusting the Commonwealth. If Rick didn't leave, we'd still be seeing Daryl having these little disagreements with Rick, instead of just taking his place and doing what he did in the comics. Daryl would never be a villain, obviously, but he'd have these little disagreements with him. He always was that more disagreeable, however capable character. It's around this time there would be much more severe, more impactful riots at the Commonwealth. This is where we see the true corruption of it all. Daryl and Rick talk, and Daryl suggests they take over. Rick says, have you learned nothing? He explains how people will die and they could lose. He tells Daryl to get out. There's later a big scuffle with Daryl and the Commonwealth guards. The guards threaten to take Daryl in, with citizens shouting for them to leave him alone. Daryl lets himself get taken in after visiting Daryl in his cell and talking to him. Rick tells Michonne what Daryl said, and Rick tries to weigh up in front of her that maybe Daryl's right. Michonne disagrees, but once Daryl is out, he rejoins them both. Michonne says to Daryl that she's worried he's going to make a stupid mistake. Daryl snaps back. Rick stops him and says we can all work together. Michonne agrees and says she's glad to hear that from him. That's why she's invited Pamela. Pamela bursts in. She's been listening from the hallway, and she says she's pleased that her, Rick and Michonne are on the same page. But Daryl, I'm sorry, but you're just gonna have to go. Michonne is surprised to see that she's brought Lance and a load of guards with her, but she's heard Daryl's suggestions, and there's no way she's gonna let him stick around. Rick looks at her with that "what did you do" expression. Daryl explodes.
Don't you get it, Rick? She with them now.
He has one last angry rant while Pamela calls for his arrest. Before he pulls up his gun, aims it at Pamela, Rick shouts. He now pulls up his gun, aims it at Daryl, and doesn't shoot him. Those big comic deaths, I think, to this day can still happen in the other shows. But even with Rick still there, I think the CRM would be teased so much more because they would still branch out, like that of the MCU. That's what everyone's doing now. They're making a franchise out of the shows. So again, what I've just narrated for you was actually Dwight's comic death. But because of this bigger plan, characters like Daryl would be spared. Even with Rick in it, even if it wasn't decided yet that he was going to leave, they were still teasing the CRM. And I think the CRM was always going to be about branching out. I don't think there would be quite as many spin-offs, but as soon as Rick did leave, there was a Universal movie trilogy planned. Now, as you probably know already, Daryl wasn't in the comics. He was more inspired and moulded from Dwight. It was cleverly done to where when the Saviors arrived, he would take the crossbow, he would take the vest. These are Dwight things. Daryl was a lot like Dwight in the main show, so he doesn't need to be like Rick, because Rick's in the show, so we can have Daryl doing what Daryl would do. But instead of dying like Dwight, he would be spared, because I think they would have always branched out. Even if in the end it affected the quality of the main show, they could still absolutely be saving Dwight and Rick's comic fate for that big final chapter of the main story. They're not effective fates unless it's the final chapter, and in the main show in season 11, it wasn't. Daryl is locked up, not shot because we still need him. With Rick now aiming his gun at Daryl, Daryl looks back with tears in his eyes. He's not only surprised and hurt that Rick is actually aiming at him, but he gets a wake-up call. He snaps out of it. He's put back in a cell. We saw this is what Lance actually did to the characters in the show. Daryl would be there. Pamela announces to the Commonwealth that there was an attempt on her life in the early hours of the morning and that Rick Grimes saved her. But funnily enough, everyone but Rick is turning against Pamela and starting to fight back. After this, Mercer is caught conspiring against her and is locked up too. The undoing of the Commonwealth begins. Mercer and Daryl are freed. Daryl kills Lance, and Rick charges into Pamela's office and warns her that people are coming after her. Rick leads Pamela and Sebastian out of a back exit. Sebastian starts shouting at Rick, "Who put you in charge?" Rick puts him in his place, and he sends them away to a place Pamela calls Greenville until the crowds have died down. And one of the final acts of the show is everyone at the Commonwealth uniting and fighting the biggest herd they've ever seen. The citizens and the guards are all working together. Pamela and Sebastian return with loads of Commonwealth guards. She immediately accuses Rick of lying. "You just wanted to get me out of the way so you could be the leader." She commands an attack. But before anything happens, Rick stands between the armies, where he gives his famous "We are not the Walking Dead" speech. Pamela tries to urge the guards to attack, but they stand down. They listen. Defeated, she tries walking to the gate, with all the walkers trying to get in. She sees a reanimated Lance. She knows that Rick wants to just lock her up, so she tries walking into him to get bit, but Maggie shoots him. Rick says his final speech and everyone agrees. Pamela is arrested. Rick goes to visit Pamela in her cell later, and it's a lot less antagonistic than when Carol and Daryl visited her in the show.
At least we don't have to worry about who gets your house.
It would be Rick apologising. That's what he was like at the end. Even with Lance's CRM antics, Pamela was definitely a lot less involved in that. It was Lance that pretty much tried to scare her with the idea that he's in talks with them, not her. Rick and Pamela have a different conversation. He saw this as her safest way out in the moment. But Rick opens the cell door and lets her walk away, and it feels wrong. That night, Rick is awoken to an angry Sebastian aiming at Rick, ready to shoot. Before he can, Daryl knocks him out. He's locked up. Sebastian is in a cell so that he can get better. He will learn to be humble in his cell and glad he wasn't killed, a treatment he didn't grant so kindly on others. There's a 6-year time jump. Carol takes Lance's job. Maggie becomes the new president of the Commonwealth. The ending of The Walking Dead is Rick reading Judith the story of the past 11 seasons. But the story is far from over. So this is what I think would happen if Rick Grimes stayed in The Walking Dead's main show. But we'll never know for sure. What do you think would happen if Rick stayed? Do you agree with what I've said? Do you prefer what actually happened in the show? Or do you prefer this timeline that I've created? What other characters do you think I should do a what if on? Let me know what you think down below. Of course, press the like button on the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.